Welcome to ClickPoint, where we explore how this powerful combination transforms lives across industries like education, technology, venture capital, and sustainability. Today, we are speaking to Dan Blumberg, who is the host of an amazing podcast called Crafted, which is a show that focuses on great products and the people who make them. One of the really interesting topics that we touched on today is the power of storytelling through technology. Let's dig in. I am so excited that, Dan, you had the time and the space to join me on this podcast, which is, fairly new. So I'm just going to jump right into this. I'm going to start you off with a super easy question, a real softball. How has your personal journey influenced your approach to leveraging technology within the work that you do, whether it be the development work that you've done with startups or with Crafted, the podcast itself?
One of the games that I got obsessed with when I was 12 or something was Railroad Tycoon. I don't know if you ever played that.
Yes.
Where you basically you connect, Brussels to Antwerp and run, coal, and you make steel, and you have manufactured goods, but you make this whole system, right?
Yeah.
You're making the idea is you're making a very profitable system. And I look back at that app as one of the first things when I look back at how I became a product manager. That app sort of teaches you systems thinking, and it teaches you how to optimize things in a certain way. And so that's sort of, as far as early experiences, that's sort of, that on a PC Junior kind of comes to mind. But my career is I became a radio producer who then became a product manager, largely in media contexts. And I've done a lot of innovation work. You mentioned Citi. I was an entrepreneur in residence at Citi Ventures, where I helped the big bank, or at least I tried, help the big bank innovate and launch new products and do things in sort of a lean startup style way. The book, The Lean Startup, came out at a really fortuitous time for me. It was right when I was making a pivot from having been a public radio producer. I used to produce Morning Edition at WNYC, and then I sort of was interested in this thing. I sort of learned this thing. There was this thing called product, which I had never heard of before, especially in the East Coast. It was really not a thing that people knew of, really. 2012 or so it was right. A thing in Silicon Valley, maybe at the most at that point. Very different today. Everyone's, there's all sorts of,
everyone's a product manager. Right.
Yeah. I mean, and my aha on that was when Indeed ran a commercial. I think it was during the Emmys or the Oscars, 5 years ago. And it's this hero's journey of someone looking to get their dream job. And
yes.
They're struggling, they're striking out, they can't get their job. And then they go to Indeed and they they show this on screen in front of millions of viewers. The person types in product manager on screen. And then the protagonist lands his dream job, and it's at a very IKEA style startup. And but the fact that they could even use the phrase product manager in front of that wide of an audience, I was it's very different now.
Now it's okay.
Anyway, so the Lean Startup came out right as I was making that switch, and that book has sort of influenced the way that I've helped companies like the New York Times and Citi, and now as I consult, build and test their way into new products.
Huh.
Hope that sort of answered your question.
That totally answered the question. That was great. And it made me think of another question. It's off script. We are already off script. I like to put together a bunch of questions that I think will align with the guest, but then the guest always says something, and I'm like, well, let's go down that road. Obviously the purpose of the podcast is to sort of talk about how we professionals in general, we as people, use technology to connect, and the delta between connecting interpersonally with people in the way that you and I met in person and connected. And then the difference between that and sort of having these digital relationships with people. They can be functional, they can be professional, they can be personal, whatever. But where that delta is, where strengths lie, weaknesses, all of that. And you just said something that was really interesting that talked about the storytelling of that specific Indeed commercial. Can you talk about, you hinted at this, and it's just the way you just described it. Can you talk about the importance of storytelling within your work as well? because what you just did, you really uniquely analyzed that commercial from the storytelling perspective and sort of and displayed the power of storytelling in addition to the story of like, oh, product manager is a thing now. Can you talk
Sure.
more about
Yeah.
storytelling and how that sort of ties into the work that you do?
Sure. I mean, you're talking to someone who, worked as a journalist for a decade, and now I don't quite call myself a journalist, but I do host a podcast and interview lots of folks. So storytelling is really important. And, that commercial that I was remembering, I don't even know if I remember that accurately, but it was effectively like the hero's tale. It was a 3-act play,
Mm-hmm.
right? There was like, who is the person? What's the struggle? And then what's the transformation? And that, you can apply those 3 acts to all sorts of things, including product design. And it's often how I think of my own podcast often is I interview someone and I try to understand what's the background, what's their context, what's the thing they're trying to achieve. And I ask lots of questions of how they tried, failed, iterated, tried again. And, and then there's hopefully a crescendo where they succeed and they have a successful product or business or whatever. I remember actually seeing, again, back in that same era when I was just learning to become a product manager, there's a guy named James Buckhouse, who today he was at Pixar, and like he worked on the Shrek movies and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got it. When I first met him, I think he was at Twitter as a product designer or product manager or something. Today he's at Sequoia and he advises lots of folks on design. But I remember him I went to a conference and he gave a talk at it where he talked about how, in every scene in all the movies he'd worked on, like in Shrek walks in happy, something happens, he walks out unhappy. Next scene, he walks in unhappy, something happens, he walks out happy. And so it's all about transformation. And so, if you apply that to, and I remember meeting him later at Twitter and he talked about ways that like this is way long ago, back when Twitter was good, back when like the internet was like more of a happy place.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
yeah. But that notion of transformation, that storytelling, like, I worked as a journalist for a long time, so like literally I would like find out what is the story and verify that it's accurate, and but present it in a way that it's compelling, as you can present things in a very dry way or in a a way that grabs people, and you can do that with an interesting lead, like as you read a newspaper or the first words of a interview podcast, like you have to grab people, and that's storytelling.
So, all right, because now this is just going to become a storytelling podcast. It's just the way you're describing it is so interesting. Even like the Shrek analogy, you come in, you're happy, something bad happens, and he leaves unhappy. Like, can you talk about how you use that methodology with products that you've worked on? And it could be specific. I mean, you kind of described it a little bit with Crafted. Is this advice that you would often give, let's say, founders, or a lens that you would bring to products at some of the companies that you previously worked at? The idea of, all right, someone's going to interact with this, and we want them to be a Shrek in this way. Once they're done, or once they've put this product down, they're leaving with a smile on their face, or they're leaving being curious. I don't know. Can you talk about how you've brought that to some of your work?
I mean, I think I'll try to think of a specific example as I go here, but I think the one very specific way this manifests is like you see a lot of companies, startups, whatever, and they advertise features. So what? Like, why do I need AI? Like, AI is a tool, and there's and all these features are just tools. Why do I need that? Why do I need that tool? Whereas you can lead with benefits or the transformation, like you're frustrated by this, and this, and we can help you achieve, I don't know, nirvana, or we can help you be a more effective, salesperson, right? And it's not about, because we have AI we can do it, or because we have whatever the widget is that's just been built. So that's one area where you often see that on, just like changing the language on a landing page can make a huge difference if you just focus on the benefits. The other thing, and this gets to like the jobs to be done style of product innovation, which I've become a big fan of over the last couple of years.
Can you break that down? Yeah,
for sure. Jobs to be done. It's very wonky language, and it was very off-putting to me for a long time. For it's like too academic. It came out of academics who first created it. But basically, what it is that people don't. The core message is people don't. People hire a product. That's the sort of academic. They like hire a product to do a job. And so if you look for the jobs that people are hiring them for, the jobs are kind of eternal. Trying to think of a canonical example here, like music, right? Like, you're a musician, right? So like, there was you'd go to a concert, then you would have vinyl, then you would have a tape or a CD or an MP3 or an iPod, or now it's your phone. Like the job of like, take me someplace else with music, that job is not going away. The way that it's solved, this gets back to like the tools. Like the tools are always changing, but that outcome is not. So that's like sort of the first things. People are hiring a tool for a job. The job is not really going to change, but the tools might. But the thing the reason I mentioned a second ago is there's a high focus on switching costs, which is one of the things I like about jobs to be done. There's a lot you can read about it, but like it focuses a lot on like, what is it that's attractive about a new solution? What is it that's pulling you to a new solution? What is it that's pushing you away? Like the anxieties. So that's the fear of like, I don't know if this thing is going to work for me. Like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work for me to switch. That's where, like Apple has us people like so locked into their system. They do a good job of actually creating that anxiety. But like one of the examples that comes to mind is one of the guys who created the jobs to be done framework. He's a practitioner. His name is Bob Mesta, and he tells a story of how he was trying to help a home builder had built a bunch of homes for people who were retiring and downsizing, and the homes weren't selling that well, and they were trying to figure out why. And they could have changed their messaging to focus on how wonderful the homes are, how comfortable they are. They could have, changed any number of things. But he interviewed a lot of people and learned through the interviews that the thing that was really holding them back was the switching cost. It was, they didn't know what to do with their stuff. They had this big house. The kids had moved out. They had all this stuff.
My parents are going through that right now, what you're describing.
Yeah. And so the way that they helped get those houses to sell, the new smaller houses, was they were like, we'll help you with storage, or we'll help you deal with your stuff. It was like, you have stuff. We know it's, we'll help you figure it out. And so anyway, so that's just an example of like that sort of, I guess is, I don't know, the sort of transformation people are looking for. They want to downsize, but what's holding them back? And so that's one example of a way that you can approach. And if you start looking for this stuff, in messaging of like the messaging that's helping people push people to a new solution or holding them back, that's where you'll see things like, easy returns and stuff like that. That's all about reducing the anxiety of a new thing.
Okay, so all right, I'm gonna take what you just said. Watch this move. This is a Jedi move I'm gonna pull right here. Okay. So I'm gonna take the jobs to be done thing you just described, and then make a connection between that and connecting with people. So I recently have been going through something similar. I've, since before the pandemic, I used Zoom because everybody used Zoom, and it was just like, it was functional, it worked, everybody got used to it. And then as a result of the pandemic, all these other tools have sort of sprouted up, like Google Meet became more popular. There's a million of these things. And so the job to be done is, for me, how do I connect with people in this way digitally, but still feels personal? But how do I do several of them, and how does it align with like my workflow and all of that? And so, because I mentioned Zoom, I'm going to mention this other product. And so recently, for like the past 6 months, usually when you and I talk, I use this tool called Roam. And an extended free trial of it. And I just yesterday came to this point where it's like, oh, I need to buy this, but I don't know if it's going to do all the things that Zoom does, even though there's a free version of Zoom I can use. But I'm like, what happens if I need the meeting or if I need a meeting and it needs to be in Zoom, whatever the case is. And then I met with one of the reps from the company, and he was explaining all of these things to me. And one of them was like the price was cheaper, and there are all these features involved with it. And the AI part of it is the part that I love the most, which isn't like an interactive piece, but more something to help me to sort of recall really important details I might miss in the meeting. And then I sort of shifted. I was like, oh, I get this. I see how I can go to this other thing, even though I've assigned so much of this level of communication to Zoom. Not that I love Zoom, but it's just what I use. And people can say the same thing about MacBooks.
Yeah.
Like, I love this, I hate this, but it's the same thing. It's like, I don't think, oh, it's time for me to get a new computer. Let me look around and see what, Toshiba has going on Compaq and compare that to Mac. It's more which version of a Mac am I going to get? So this is a long way of saying, as far as tools that you use to connect with people, which tools do you feel are the most effective? And have you had to make that transition at all as well from the jobs to be done sort of perspective, and why? Like, what are the things that you're looking for when you're using technology to connect with people, whether it be personally or professionally?
I mean, it's interesting, all the video conferencing tools, like we're using Riverside right now, which is like Zoom, but built for podcasters. And it's quite good at that function. It's interesting how actually I like to look at like project management software. There are so many versions of project management software, project management for filmmakers, project management for accountants, and they all have their own workflows. And so you think like, how can like everyone need their own custom thing? But at least with project management, it seems like the market has shown they do. Right. As far as like video conferencing tools, I'm independent now. And so I'd have to pay for my own Zoom. And for whatever reason, I actually haven't done it. And I'm using Google Meet, and I am actually appreciating Zoom, which is much better. And I should just pay for it. But I kind of freeload off of other people's Zooms too often, I think. And so I'm still using it a lot of the time. Right. But the encoding is just better. It's just more reliable. So as far as Zoom goes, and I dread whenever I get a Microsoft Teams invite. That was just
we're just like bashing all of these tools now.
Well, no, I know. I was saying nice things about Zoom just now. No, I was saying very nice things about Zoom. Microsoft Teams, just like, it's like, okay, this is. I used to work at LinkedIn. I used to work for Microsoft, although it didn't. Anyways, it was a subsidiary, but. Yeah, where were we? I don't know. I mean, what do I look for? I look for things that are that work well, obviously. So back to the jobs to be done thing for a second. One of the things I like about that framework is it talks about the different types of jobs. So it's just about to list the types of things that I want these technology tools to do for me. So, jobs to be done talks about functional jobs. So like it works, emotional jobs. How does it make you feel? And then some products perform a social job of how does it make others perceive you? Yes. And so if I send you a Microsoft Teams link, you may think differently of me than if I send you a Zoom or a Roam. Like if you send me a Roam, I'd never use Roam until you sent me that link, so it made me see you as like someone who's trying new tools because I'd never heard of it, and I like to think that I know stuff, but I was like, oh, okay, I'm learning something new, and you've done your research, and so. I think for me on the video conference was sort of how does it work well? Does it stutter, and does it work with low bandwidth or whatever, any issues that come up like that? But also just like, how does it feel? And I actually just had on Crafted the hosts of a different podcast called Design Better. And one of them mentioned Slack versus HipChat, which functionally were the exact same product, right? It was like chat with your teams, but Slack was more fun. It had more emojis, and it was, and so it won. And this guy's written a book. This guy, Aaron Walter, was the co-host who said this. He's written a book called Design for Emotion, and it's all about like why you would design things, that felt better, that don't necessarily like functionally do anything different. And so I like that. I'll probably use that example more now that he's reminded me of HipChat, which I did use like forever ago. And
I've never even heard of that.
Oh, HipChat was a predecessor to Slack. I used it at a startup in like 2011 or so, and then Slack beat it so badly that Atlassian, which had bought HipChat, ended up investing in Slack. Wow! And killing HipChat. That's how badly they got thumped. And according to Aaron, who reminded me of this recently, it's largely just because Slack was just more fun. Otherwise, they were really the same product.
So
And you see that sometimes. That's honestly, you mentioned Apple and PCs, like they're pretty much the same product, but they feel very different.
They feel different. So let's dig into the idea of something being more fun, whether it be the emojis, all of that. Do you feel that it is easier for you? And I already know the answer to this, but I'm interviewing you. I have my own answer, I should say. The process, the job to be done is the same. Connecting with someone digitally and, whether it's professional or personal, the idea of making it feel like, oh, we couldn't be in the same room, but it's okay. We got stuff done. We had a couple of laughs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is it about, and not to make this about teams being horrible. I'm sure the people who work on teams are really nice and they mean well. But what is it about one tool over the other? And you can use any of them. It could even be Meet, where you're just like, man, this thing is great. And I feel the same. Like I feel presence with you and I using this right now. And we talked in a bunch of different mediums.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think before I answer that, the thing I would say is I think there's like a correlation causation issue here, because like the companies that are using Teams already have a certain culture and also have like security requirements, which is probably why they're using Teams. They're probably like Microsoft shops. And so like, I think back to like when I was at Citi, I was actually at Citibank when they adopted Teams. They were already using Outlook and all the other Microsoft things. And they were trying to adopt Teams and the chat. They were actually still using Skype, a different Microsoft product. This is only like a couple of years ago. They were still using Skype for a lot of people to do DMs. And a lot of banks actually like this issue of like user experience and like how good is the product, and you want to like have a chat with people. A lot of banks, I think Citi was among them, got pretty significant fines from the federal government for using, because a lot of employees were using WhatsApp or text message, and by law, investment traders and other people who works at bank like have to document all of their work communications.
Right.
And so, but the tools sucked. And so a lot of people were, like, I got, and it might even be sort of a gray area of like, I'm just sharing a news article with you and like, let me just text it to you. Let me WhatsApp it to you. But then you might respond with like, oh, that makes me think of this thing we're doing at work. Like, anyway, there were like $100 million fines issued to many, many banks and financial institutions. And it's largely because these communications tools sucked. So there's actually like a real impact here of not having security compliant, I don't know, instant communication tools. So I think Teams actually solves the problem. So, but your question was about how, I don't know, how these tools make me feel or how I feel when I use these communication tools.
Essentially, how connected do you feel and why? With me, when I use Teams, I feel like I can never get a view of the other person, or if there are multiple people that that is, and maybe we have these things built up in our heads, whether it be through AOL or through, Apple or FaceTime or something, where it's like, oh, when I see this, then I know that this person is looking at me and talking to me. And you know what I mean? That sort of thing, which then creates a level of intimacy, which might almost mirror meeting them in person or maintain that connection that we had when we met in person. So that's for me. I'm curious about for you, what that is for you that makes you feel either more connected or less connected based upon the tool that you're using.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on if it's like a one-on-one conversation or it's a group thing. The group things with people not putting their cameras on, and I'm one of those people. I find looking at a camera all day is totally exhausting, and if I'm in a group meeting, I'd rather just listen. But then there's weird social dynamics if only half people are doing that. So one-on-one, I find these tools are pretty, like, I think they fade into the background pretty quickly. You and I are on Riverside right now. I'm looking, at you, what feels like I'm looking in your eyes. I'm actually back to my like podcast is now a video show. I actually have a teleprompter now. So I'm actually looking at a camera that's behind a monitor. So I can actually like really look like what looks like at your eyes, not with the camera, like, above my monitor, and I'm looking at you, but but to you, it'll look like I'm looking down Hopefully it looks like I'm looking straight at you right now. That's
Totally.
new hardware that I have. But I think largely with like the video conference tools, if it's a one-on-one thing, I don't notice the chrome of the tool that we're using as much. If it's a group thing, then I think it's more apparent. Like, I mean, one thing with Zoom that I think other video conference tools do this, but it's harder to find. Or I think with Google Meet, you can only half do it. On Zoom, I have disabled self view, completely disabled self view.
Me too.
I never see myself because I, and apparently all of us, were vain, and we're going to look at ourselves and we're going to, like, whatever, check if there's stuff in our teeth or something.
Right.
And so I've
There's
just
nothing in your
disabled
teeth.
self
You're
view
good.
on Zoom. Oh, thank you. I've completely disabled self view, but on Google Meet, you can only minimize, but you're still there on the screen. Like a mirror of yourself is still there, kind of bottom right corner. So that's one of the features that I very much appreciate, that might exist on Teams. I don't know. Teams has a really funny view. I don't know if you've ever seen this on Teams, where if you have a group, you can kind of assemble the group, like
it's like in an auditorium,
in like an amphitheater. It's like the first time I ever saw it, it was the funniest thing. It was when I was working at Citi, when I was using Teams a lot, and suddenly it was like, the VP of engineering and like a bunch of other people were suddenly like floating heads in this like Roman amphitheater looking thing. It was
weird. It's weird.
It was really weird. I mean, I like that they're trying new stuff. And maybe some people love it. Maybe I'm just not the right person for that, but it was
neither am I.
It was novel.
Neither am I. All right. Well, so along those lines, we were talking about, and it's like some of these questions, it's interesting. They may feel redundant to you, but I know that you travel a decent amount for conferences, but not a lot. Similar to me. You're a family guy, and there's responsibilities at home. So, how do you sort of reconcile the relationship between using technology and maintaining human connection in those professional settings? If we're talking on the phone or we're talking like this, it's like, all right, it's Dan. I know him, he knows me, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But for people that, hey, you're interviewing people in Crafted all the time that you've never met before, and then you have a short window of time to develop a level of intimacy with them in order to not only get them to answer questions honestly, but to be open and to even draw out insights. How do you create that balance between not actually knowing them or you're having met them in person to get to that level of intimacy and doing it all digitally?
Yeah, I've most guests I have not met in person. I do on my show almost always, actually exclusively, if I've not met them at all, I will always do a pre-interview. So I'll talk to them for like 30 minutes because I want them to know who the target audience of the show is, the Crafted is for people who make software, and so they can speak at a level of technical of product technicality that like is right for people who actually make software. And then there can be an umbrella of folks that are interested in tech but they're not necessarily making it. So I like to sort of prep them with that and get to know them a little bit, get to know their backstory, stuff that I wouldn't learn just by Googling them or watching previous videos or podcasts. So I try to develop a little bit of that rapport beforehand. But then we start recording. Or actually, sorry, before we start recording though, I try to do that while we're like doing the mic checks and stuff. And so one of the, and just even like as we like get the mic in the right place and whatever, do any lighting adjustments that we might do, which is we don't do a lot, but we do, maybe we'll close the blinds or something if it's backlit.
Right.
But I'm trying to keep it light, during that sort of setup. And I love, it's just the most fun question. It's the most banal, but the most fun question. But the classic question when you get a level on someone's mic is, "What'd you have for breakfast this morning?" And you didn't know that. And so like, maybe for musicians, it's all like check 1, 2, I guess. But
no one cares.
Radio people, but for radio people, like this is what I was taught, and it was like just ask them something, get them to say something, because if you just have them say like test 1, 2, they're not really speaking into the mic the way they would normally speak. So like, what they have for breakfast? Okay. And it's the funniest thing. Like, you learn a lot from people. Like, I just had a cigarette was a response I might've gotten more like 10 years ago than you get that quite as much today. or you get like, I'm an intermittent faster. I had nothing, or I had yogurt granola. Like you like learn a lot in a strange. So I don't know, that's sort of a good warm up question, both because you get a level on their voice and you get the mic levels correct, but also it somehow ends up morphing into interesting conversation. Like I actually opened one of the crafted episode with Colin Nettercorn, who is the founder and CEO of Customer IO. They make product-led growth data products for other companies. I asked him this question, and to the thing that we were sort of shooting the shit before we hit record. And I was like, no, hit record early, because we ended up missing something, which is when I asked him what he had for breakfast, he mentioned, I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's I can't think of it. It's some product that is marketed as like, it will extend your life. It's like the guy behind it has built some, it's like, I think the word butter is in there somewhere. Blanking on it. But we ended up opening the episode with like him saying like, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? And he talks about this guy who's built this product, and he's trying to like extend his life to live to be like 150. And so Colin's like eating the nutty butter or something like that, whatever it's called. And
right.
It ended up being just sort of a light, silly way to start the episode. And that just got us off on the right foot for, a good conversation thereafter.
I like that. It's almost like there's almost like a CIA aspect to this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to ask you this innocuous question, and we're setting up the microphones, but then I'm getting a sense, like a quick slice of who you are, and then it almost feels like your role is to sort of lean into that or adjust to that to draw out what you need to draw out.
Yeah.
Do you feel that, or actually, this is an interesting question, and this is something that I ran into a lot in a previous podcast that I did. I was doing this podcast with this friend of mine, and he and I would take turns bringing on guests. And so it was a longer form podcast. So we'd go for like an hour and a half, hour 15 or whatever. So at the end of it, and I'd hear this person's entire story. And so I'm like, oh, this person and I are friends now. And then I'd see these people in the real world, and it'd be like, oh, hey, KwaKu. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This person doesn't really know me at all, because we just talked about them. And I have this really clear sense of who they are.
Yeah.
And so for you, because you've been doing Crafted for a while, and you were also on the radio for a while prior to that, did you feel that some of these like digital connections led to like in-person connections and even collaborations? And if so, do you have an example of one of those?
I'm hoping that it will lead to more. I mean, the show is 2 years old,
right,
and I'm very focused right now on basically making the content and sort of planting seeds where I hope they'll grow.
Yeah.
And the story of Crafted is I launched it with a software consultancy that I was with. They had hired me for something completely different. They had hired me to be a product leader, and they kind of half mentioned, oh, we're thinking of maybe launching a podcast. And I said, hi, I worked in radio for 10 years. Are we serious about this? And so that's how I actually came to launch the show, which is this funny thing. Like my radio career kind of came back and found me, and then I rediscovered how much I enjoy it. So when I was at Artium, where the show was much more explicitly about, a little more near-term planting seeds where we hoped they would grow. Yes, it did. It did definitely help. We had one major engagement with a very large bank. Actually, I guess I can say it because she was on stage with me live. We did a live event, a live recorded version of Crafted, and one of the senior people at BNY Mellon was there on stage with me, and that helped lead to an engagement that we did with BNY Mellon. So that's one example where that, it was one of like multiple touch points. It wasn't just because we had her on stage with me, but it definitely helped. And like the night, the on-stage interview went really, really well. She was all smiles, like none of that hurts, right? Like that's all good stuff. So that's one. And there were other, and many other examples where guests of the show, we would follow up, the thing with, the thing with selling consulting services is like, it's great to, people have to have a need, like at that moment. And so sometimes like you develop a relationship and they're like, great, now I know to call you when XYZ, and like XYZ might not be today, but so there are a lot of examples of that where we would have follow-up meetings with me and our CEO or head of engineering or things like that. And so I'm not explicitly asking guests for anything right now. This is, by the way, a very like I'd never even heard of this kind of podcast before, where like the guests of the show, like I was trained as a journalist, like you interview people because they're newsworthy, not because you want something
interesting
from them.
or interesting.
And so yeah, or interesting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's, yeah. But so even this notion of podcasting as a marketing tool was something I had to actually learn about, and still have I'm still sort of figuring out, like, is that, that's not what I'm doing now, I don't think, but I also wouldn't say that I'm doing journalism right now. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
But
the messy middle.
But yeah, but along the way, like, it is very fun, and you know this. You actually do this in real life. But for most people, having a podcast is a great excuse to ask people anything.
Right.
Whereas, like, I wouldn't do that in real life necessarily, but like once we're recording, like, it seems like sort of anything's kind of fair game, and so you get to talk to really, really fascinating people and ask them all sorts of questions that would be, I don't know, what might not come up naturally if you were just, with them in person.
Like in a bar and just interviewing them relentlessly. Yeah, I can't relate to that at all. All right. This is, I'm going to pivot slightly. This is something we've talked about, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on this without me being like, you should be doing this, because I feel like we'll have phone calls. I'm like, dude, are you doing this? Or have you thought about this? All right. I'm trying to think of the best way to frame this. As far as emerging technology, there's a subtle wink to AI with that. How do you see that impacting the future of your work? I'm going to say specifically as a podcaster, and I'm going to flag Notebook LM as an example of that. And so for people who don't know what Notebook LM is, it's this software that Google released a couple months ago, and you can basically take like a PDF and upload it to this website, and it produces like a 10-minute podcast of two people who apparently are way more charming than Dan and I, going back and forth about the content in the PDF. So it can be about anything. So how do you see technology like this, or other technology that we may have discussed or that you may know of, influencing the field of podcasting, which seems to be really, air quotes, taking off, especially, politically and all these different ways?
Well, Notebook LM is funny. Like, when it first came out and I first listened to that podcast feature, like, it blows your mind for, like, it still blows my mind. It's incredible that the technology is this good at all, and it can take any form of, you can feed it anything. It doesn't have to be a PDF. You can feed it, lots and lots of text or a video or an audio file. I went meta with it. I actually fed it a previous episode of mine. I gave it the audio file. Wow. And I had it make a podcast of my podcast. And it's very cringe. I actually, it's a parody. For me, it's a parody of what a podcast sounds like. And in many ways, you realize, like, how, I don't know, like if you look at like how ChatGPT writes, like it writes at a, like, literally a mediocre level. Like, it is, because everything about all these AI tools, unless you like start to really fine tune them and get really good at prompting, like, it will give you a mediocre response. Like, it will give you the average of the entire internet kind of response. So the average podcast is like two kind of chatty people. They kind of interrupt each other, and Google like did a great / cringe job of, like, they interrupt each other but kind of complete each other's sentences, and they kind of giggle a bit, and they're like, and like they finish it like, oh yeah, and then that makes me think of and then oh my god, and I love when he said this, and oh, like, it, I haven't done this yet, but I saw a bunch of people in my LinkedIn feed feeding their LinkedIn profile to Notebook LM.
Oh, wow.
And then having it spit back to them a podcast, basically like pumping up their tires, like how great, like this, like, oh, like KwaKu, like what an interesting career he's had. He's done this. He's done, oh yeah, and he's done that. He's done that. It's just Notebook LM, like reading back your LinkedIn profile, but with like personality,
fake excitement. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so it might make you feel good. It might also, I don't know, might make you feel different. I don't know. It was so it's, you sort of pretty quickly figure out the trick of what they're doing. It's still technically completely remarkable. And there are other people who are, and Google, not just other people, will take that technology and they'll make it so that you can fine tune it. You can change the voices. There's a guy that I know who, he's the co-founder of a company called Wondercraft right now. And they actually make it possible to use AI to create all sorts of audio. And they actually use that Notebook LM moment as it was great for them because it kind of makes people aware of what's possible. And they're like, hey, have you heard of Notebook LM, which had this big moment? Well, we can do it, but we can change the voices. We can help you have more control. And so that's one area that I think is interesting. So that's one company, Wondercraft, that's you might want to check out. I mean, I use AI, I use it. There's one tool that I use all the time to make the podcast, which is Descript. Do you know the product?
I'm not familiar with it now.
So Descript, or some people call it Descript, it's actually founded by Andrew Mason, who was the guy who founded Groupon back in the day. And he's always been a podcast nerd. But what the software does, it's a lot of audio and video editors use it. Basically, it enables you to edit audio or video like it's a Google Doc. So you feed it the audio video file, and then it automatically transcribes it to like 95% accuracy. It gets proper names wrong mostly, but otherwise does an incredible job of transcribing it. And then you can edit. If you want to cut out a paragraph, you just see the text of it. You just highlight and delete that paragraph or strike through it. And if you want to look at the waveform, you can look at the waveform. Yeah. But you can see. And I used to, when I worked in radio at Chicago Public Radio, at WNYC, like almost 20 years ago now, like I'd gotten to the point where like I knew what an looked like. Like I knew what the waveform of an looked like. And I'd be like, oh, I'm going to cut that.
Or like a breath, like when someone, because for music, we would if you would record, I've recorded songs and you're like, oh, I was breathing here, and you're like cleaning all of it up. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you don't even have to do that anymore. In fact, actually, with like filler words like and and like, there's a tool in Descript that if you want to just remove all of them with one click, you can do it. I don't do that because I think that tool still needs work. Like it actually cuts breaths in half. If you like just remove all the ums automatically or auto magically, it does an okay job. And I think some podcasters don't care, or maybe they don't notice. I don't know, but I wanted a little. It doesn't. It'll get better. All these things are going to get better. But I use Descript all the time, and it's almost like once it becomes standard, it's like not even AI anymore. Like a few
There's
people recently have mentioned
that. There's a term for that. Like once the technology becomes so ubiquitous,
it's not technology anymore.
Yeah.
Like
I don't know
Google Translate.
Yeah,
exactly. I don't either. But like Google Translate is remarkable, and that's all AI based. So we don't, but like it's not the cool generative AI anymore. So we don't really talk about it. But it's completely unbelievable that it could automatically translate. And like the same thing with the tool I just mentioned, Descript or Wondercraft. They could take your podcast and then put it in Cantonese or whatever.
Right. All right. Okay. Oh, see, and this is the problem because we are almost at time. But this thing that you said is giving me this idea. So I'm going to ask you one last question. It's going to be another small one. It's going to be really quick. This is all sarcasm. So with tools like that, and I'm going to frame it out even so it's an even longer question. When I first started recording music, we literally go into a studio, you record it onto tape, and someone would have to be able to cut the tape. So if you ran out of tape or if you needed more tracks, it was like a really specific methodology to do this. And then we moved, as I was a musician, we moved into this world of like the digital recording piece where you had way more tracks. You didn't have to worry about that, which was great. And we'll say that's somewhere near like late 90s, early 2000s. And then we moved into this world where you could, the term I believe is quantize. You could quantize things like drums. So someone would record drums and, as you're playing drums, some drummers, they will speed up and slow down a little bit, but they're usually doing it in time to the music. And it would quantize the drums so that they were perfectly in time. And then the musicians would play on top of it. And the artist in me didn't like that because
it was too perfect.
It was too perfect. There was something there was something human that was being removed from that. Like I like the flaws in music. I like when I'm hearing things bleed through things that aren't supposed to be there. Um, and so specifically with you, I'm going to ask you this. How do you think that tool that where you're removing the breaths, or this idea of creating these like perfect conversations without the ums and without the breaths,
Yeah.
how does that connect, or how does that negatively affect the idea of a conversation? And I'm gonna add this last caveat. Like my kids, when they were younger, I tried to watch Sesame Street with them, and I was shocked because every song was auto tuned. All of the Muppets or all of the little puppets, every time they sang, it was
Mm-hmm.
auto tuned. And so in their
Yeah.
minds, that's what good singing sounds like.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
These,
what is lost with that process, bringing it to, podcasting?
yeah. That is a very small question. And I did an interview with your San Diego neighbor, Dia El Al, the founder and CEO of Soundful, and we talk a lot about this. And he actually literally, so I'm just quoting him here. He says he's building a tool that allows you to use AI to make music, and he says it's designed to be used by a human. It's not designed to replace a human. It's designed to augment. And he's like, the thing that's going to make fantastic music is that imperfection. It's that human element, that je ne sais quoi, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
And so we had a whole chat about that. As far as like, it's a funny thing when you edit, because when I edit an interview, it does need to sound human and natural. And that's actually why I had one agency that I work with that edited one episode of mine, and they had, I think, used that tool that automatically removed all the ums and likes and knows, and it sounded awful because they actually had cut off all the breaths. And so like my breathing, the guest breathing, it was too rushed. It sounded weird.
Right.
It's not even, that wasn't even a perfection thing. It was just I don't know why they didn't hear it or whatever. They were working too quickly. I don't know. But it is a funny thing when you edit people's speech, because you want them to sound like themselves.
Yeah.
But if they take a long time to get to the point, if they're stuttering or like sort of working up to the point, like it's okay to, and I can hear it even as I'm saying that, like I just stuttered a couple times, and you can clean that up if you want to. Like if it makes me sound better, go for it.
Right.
But you don't want it to sound like completely like somebody else. But I don't think there's a problem with making people sound, a little more concise. I interviewed someone recently. English was not his first language, and he took him a while to like say the things he was trying to say. And he's a brilliant guy, and it was a very hard edit. And I didn't want to edit it so much that it sounded unnatural, or like I wasn't going to make it sound like English was his first language no matter what. But there's a line there, and I don't know the exact line. I do remember though when I worked in radio. What we're talking about here are called internal edits, right? Like you talk to someone that you have a 60-second piece of tape, you're going to use 12 seconds, from the middle. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's ethics of like how you cut it off, because if they're about to, contradict the thing that they just said and you pull the clip, that's obviously misleading. Right. What we're talking about here are internal edits, removing removing a dependent clause that's sort of beside the point, just so you can truncate it. But I remember when I worked at Chicago Public Radio, I was told never to edit the president like that. Like never to make any internal edits when it's the president or someone really, really, really well known, where like the original audio, because it's hard to do these edits in video.
Yeah.
And this actually, by the way, speaks to like why one of the things that's kind of annoying right now about crotchety like radio person who's getting used to video, like you can't make these cuts in video, or you can, but you have to like go to B-roll and go back, or right. Just do a jump cut. You don't care, right. But like it's just harder to make these fine cuts in video. It's very easy to, not very, but it's easy to do it and easier to do it in audio. But we were told never to do that with the president or some clip where like someone might see the clip on the nightly news unedited, and they might hear it differently on WBEZ, even though we were just talking about like an or this might have just been like one editor's guidance to me, but I remember being told like not with the president, not with like,
big names,
super well-known tape. Yeah. It was a strange thing, but it gets to like, and this, I don't know, with our I don't know. I'm about to go in a different direction towards like sane washing. I'm not going to go there, but
save that one for the
yeah,
next one, for the
yeah.
next episode,
Well,
because I hear where you're going.
but yeah, but it's I think it's okay to make, and most of the time it's okay to make someone sound a little bit crisper than they are while keeping the humanity to it. But that's there's not a formula for that. That's a human thing in and of itself to know when you've gone too far.
Yeah, and I think it's also a practice. It's a gift. It's a skill to be able to bring out the point without taking out the personality. I know in music,
Yeah.
people got paid a lot of money to do that. Even, as you were talking, I was thinking about it, it's like actually most of the music that you hear, especially singers today, has some level of auto tuning in it to sort of
Yep.
hit, to hit this sort of this median, if you will, of what people expect songs to sound like. And personally, I'm hoping that doesn't happen for conversation. But that's my crotchety old man moment.
Yeah.
So with that being said, I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh, I made a promise to you and I've already run over. And this is the thing that I love and hate about podcasting is that it goes so much faster. And I'm sure, the edit of this, when it's edited, people will be like, KwaKu, just stop talking so much. But I would be remiss if I did not do the following. I want to thank you, Dan, for making time today to come and talk to me about a really nuanced conversation. The idea of not only the delta between connecting with people, but also the idea of how to produce authenticity within a podcast as we're talking about it on a podcast. Within the show notes, we'll include everything about Crafted and where people can listen to it. And I'm hoping that they listen to this episode and then they go listen to Crafted and see what an amazing job you do in crafting and editing the conversations that you have with all types of product managers, designers, creators, entrepreneurs. It's really, really remarkable. And you and I talk about this all the time because it's not really in my wheelhouse, the world of product or product design, but I always come away learning so much, similar to this podcast today. So thank you so much for your time today, buddy.
Oh
I
my
really
God.
appreciate it.
Thank you for that. You always, like, you're my hype man. I appreciate it. So anytime.
All right. So I guess that's it. Thank you guys for listening. And yeah, look forward to the next episode.